So how has drought affected agriculture in Africa?
Well, drought, we know, is the single most hazardous and disastrous natural, climate-related risk. And there has been several, droughts that have been declared in the past. For example, just to mention a few, we know there was this global kind of drought that affected most of the world. This was in the early 1940s. And actually, it affected many countries. And if you ask those who are old and from that generation, from the 1940s, they can tell you that it was really one of the most severe droughts ever witnessed. But close home in Africa, we remember the Sahelian drought in the 1970s. It was quite severe and actually caused a lot of havoc. Many people died, a lot of livestock was lost, and people suffered in a big way. However, in the recent times, in the last 3 decades, for instance, the most severest drought was around 1984-1985, particularly in the East African, the sub-Saharan region, and it was more severe, particularly in Ethiopia and parts of Somalia and parts of northern Kenya and northeastern Kenya, and even parts of Tanzania, and going a little bit even down to Zambia and Malawi. However, we also see recently in 2011, it was quite severe also within the Horn of Africa. And so some of the impacts, of course, I've mentioned, the issue of food security, food insecurity. There's been a lot of that due to the occurrence of these, severe droughts in the region. And this has, exacerbated the levels of poverty, just to mention, because you see when this happens consecutively for 2-3 seasons, most of the African families depend on rain-fed agriculture. And many economies in Africa actually depend on agriculture. And therefore, when this happens, maybe 2-3 consecutive seasons, then you can imagine what it does to the livelihoods of, communities, from the household level to the, the national level. And therefore, these are some of the impacts where livelihoods are lost. There is, scarcity of water for both domestic as well as other uses. There's also the issue of malnutrition, because now people do not have, food that is nutritiously, proper, not sufficient food, and therefore people have to cut, the proportions of food that they consume. They have to ration water. There is also even the effect on the energy, power supply, because in many countries in Africa, they depend on hydropower. And therefore, when we have drought, it affects, the groundwater. It affects the water supply in the rivers, in the dams. And therefore, this actually affects even the economy in general, because now countries have to revert to other, sources of energy, which are more expensive, like solar energy, using of, generators, which use petrol and other crude oil resources. So basically, the damage of drought cannot be underestimated. Generally, even when you look at the losses of all the natural hazards that have occurred, drought is number one.
Okay, so what is the current weather pattern in Africa? Should we be worried?
Well, that's a good question. I guess the issues of climate change are global, but from what is documented is that climate change impacts will affect Africa more compared maybe to other regions.
Continents, yeah.
Basically because of the low adaptive capacity and also the high reliance on rain-fed agriculture. And as I said, agriculture is the main, kind of, source of the stability of most of African economies. And therefore, we see that we have, in the recent past, like in the last five or so years, seen that there has been more occurrence of extreme climate events within, the sphere of the rainfall patterns. For example, within the East African region, we have seen that in 2016, at least the rain patterns were better within the March to May season. But then this was not so good. There was much depressed rains within the October to December season. Fast track in 2018, we saw a very wet March to May season, which actually people thought it was an El Nino kind of an event, which was not. And this actually led to a lot of flooding and a lot of damages in the region. Interestingly, the opposite was happening in the SADC region of the South African part of the countries, where we had some kind of severe drought. But then again, towards the end of 2018, again, we saw depressed rains. And in 2019, around March to May, again, we saw depressed rains. And therefore, one of the recent droughts, prolonged droughts, was that one from around from around actually July 2018 to around almost September the next year, meaning that we almost had 1 year which was quite tough for the region between 2018 and 2019. In the recent past, we have seen that the heavy rains have also been reported, particularly towards the end of 2019 and part of 2020. And this has led to a phenomenon which actually has been making rounds within the region and even globally, internationally, where we have seen the lakes within the Rift Valley, rising incredibly. And this, from the analysis of historical data, we see it's very closely associated with the increase in the rainfall amounts within the region, where we saw lakes like Lake Victoria rising incredibly. We have seen Lake Kyoga rising in Uganda around 2019. The same applied to Tanganyika around 2020. We have also seen Lake, I think it's 𝗔𝗵𝗿𝗶 around in Zambia, where it was, not Zambia, but Malawi, also rising. We saw this also occur in Kariba in Zambia. Again, the rises, and all attributed to the rise in the rainfall amounts. So basically, moving forward, we think that it is possible we could see this kind of extreme spike of the rainfall levels. But with regard to drought, also drought has its fair share, because it is a slow kind of occurrence, extreme weather. It does not declare when it's coming, but with the time we see periods of drought, and it's possible that we could also experience severe droughts as we move forward, particularly because of the global warming aspect.
Okay, so do we have any uncertainty? Do we expect any uncertainties in the next 5 years? Have you checked to find out whether we're going to experience some kind of uncertainties in the next 5 years or in the next few years? I mean, 2-3 years to come, in terms of drought and rainfall. I mean, we are very much interested in the drought because of our agriculture system in Africa.
Yeah, basically, there has been studies that have been looking at climate change scenarios. Different or diverse climate change scenarios have been developed to try and see whether they can provide some insight into the future. But we know, of course, these ones are largely bogged with a lot of uncertainties or bias, because they would largely depend on our climate models, which we know, of course, are not completely perfect. But from the projections that have been provided, even included in the last IPCC report, is that we expect some areas to experience enhanced rains in the next 5 or 10 years. That is even by 2030. However, this is not homogeneous across all regions. Some parts of East Africa are expected to see more rains, in the October to December seasons, as opposed to the March to May. And therefore, but some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, particularly West Africa and some parts of Central Africa, and going to the south, they are likely to see drought conditions, occurring in some of the areas within the projections of the climate models. However, this does not mean that this will be uniformly distributed. But within the East African region, also drought conditions are expected, particularly within the March to May, the long rain season. Maybe within the next 5-6 years, we expect occasionally to see drought conditions occurring. That's according to the projections. But it is important to understand that the longer the predictions you give within the climate models, the more the uncertainty you have, and therefore it is always good to always fall back to weather forecasts, seasonal forecasts, which are provided within between 1 week and 3 months, so that people can be able to plan well or to understand the dynamics of drought or dry conditions occurring.
So what should we be doing? I mean, from now, between now and the next 10 years, what should we be doing? I mean, particularly those of us in West Africa where we are likely to see drought conditions.
Well, I guess we may not reinvent the wheel, but I guess governments and all stakeholders and all those who are involved in the utility of climate and the opportunities it brings along, it's good to up the mitigation and adaptation measures that are in place in readiness. Because as I said, even when there are those projections projecting drier conditions, there are still areas within those countries or the region where we have mentioned drought conditions, where we are still likely to get better or good rainfall conditions. So in other words, putting mitigation and adaptation measures that can be ready for any event of either drought or rainfall conditions would be the best bet for now. And of course, this goes to all the players within the climate management aspects, where we try to manage the impacts. And this would include putting measures with regard to how farmers can maximize their production, perhaps using lesser rainfall when it occurs, and when there is plenty, how they can maximize production within their activities. And if they are pastoralists, then there could be issues of even storage of pasture when there is plenty, and then they can use this during those dry periods. The issue of storage of water, governments and maybe federal governments, like if it's in Nigeria or in other countries, they can come up with water storage like reservoirs and so on, so that this can be used during those drought periods. And when the droughts are over, then that water can be stored for the next